Evolutionary pressure and the strategic instability of democracy and anarcho-capitalism toward the equilibrium of evolutionary capitalism. Modern political economies are typically hybrid structures, combining elements of market-based capitalism with mass voting democratic governance. This dual system produces a structural contradiction in how decision-making power is allocated. Within the capitalist subsystem, profit and loss operate as evolutionary signals. They reward productive agents with increased resources and control, and penalize inefficiency or error with market exit. In contrast, democracy allocates decision-making power uniformly across individuals regardless of their productive contribution, creating a mismatch between evolutionary fitness and political influence. This disjunction leads to resource misallocation, particularly in state-managed projects that do not need to prove profitability to survive. Because democratic systems can obscure or delay the costs of unproductive behavior through public debt, redistribution, and inflation, they are evolutionarily fragile. Losses are often spread across the population in ways that conceal causality, allowing parasitic strategies and short-termist policies to persist. Some factions may benefit during this decay, but the net effect is a gradual depletion of evolutionary capital. Eventually, the accumulated inefficiencies trigger selection pressure in the form of economic collapse, social fragmentation, or political revolution. Parts of the system may survive and reorganize, but the overall trajectory reflects a selection against the system itself. Crucially, the magnitude of systemic loss is directly proportional to the evolutionary pressure exerted on the system. The greater the deviation between decision-making power and evolutionary productivity, the more intense the pressure becomes. Evolution does not tolerate misalignment indefinitely, it punishes it with extinction, adaptation, or absorption into more efficient structures. In contrast, evolutionary capitalism is a system where decision-making power is allocated according to past productivity, as measured through profit and a transparent, crypto-reputation system. In such a system, profit and loss are internalized, and reputation reflects an agent's historical ability to contribute to the construction of adaptive order. Agents that repeatedly make poor decisions lose influence, while those who generate long-term evolutionary profit gain it. This mechanism creates strong, continuous evolutionary pressure toward efficiency, innovation, and coordinated complexity. Evolutionary capitalism is not merely a moral ideal, it is the evolutionary equilibrium, the stable attractor toward which all viable systems converge through competitive selection. Instability of anarcho-capitalism. Anarcho-capitalism attempts to replace the state with voluntary contracts, private property norms, and competitive rights enforcement agencies, market-based firms tasked with providing security and dispute resolution. Proponents claim these agencies would operate under free market incentives and only protect legitimate property owners. However, under evolutionary analysis, this structure is inherently unstable. It is built on Lockean property rights and self-ownership, both of which lack evolutionary justification. The Lockean homesteading principle, claiming land through first use or labor, is a sunk cost fallacy. It presumes that past action entitles one to perpetual control, regardless of future productivity or adaptive value. Worse still, anarcho-capitalism envisions that security will be provided by insurance firms or overlapping rights enforcement agencies, which function like private police bound by contract. But these firms face the same systemic failures endemic to insurance markets, including adverse selection. High-risk clients are more likely to seek coverage, making stable pricing and trust difficult. Catastrophic risk. Large, unpredictable events, wars, systemic fraud, or environmental disaster can collapse the entire enforcement system. Moral hazard. Once insured, individuals have incentives to take excessive risks, provoke conflict, or rely on enforcement to pursue aggressive claims, knowing others bear the cost. In this framework, moral hazard becomes especially destructive. Clients can act recklessly, anticipating that their rights enforcement agency will absorb the costs or escalate the conflict on their behalf. Firms may retaliate not out of justice, but as a competitive signal to attract future clients. This leads to arms races, firm collusion, or cartelization, effectively creating a market for organized coercion, not a peaceful order. Anarcho-capitalism also disintegrates under the dominant highest bidder strategy. Without a universally accepted reputational metric to determine legitimacy, enforcement firms respond to whichever client offers the greatest profit. Over time, property protection becomes a function of capital, not historical claim or productive use. Whoever bids the most for enforcement wins. Ironically, this dynamic undermines the very Lockean rights that anarcho-capitalism claims to secure, because those rights can always be outbid in a contestable market. By contrast, evolutionary capitalism replaces static axioms with transparent, productivity-based reputation. Property is not protected because of a past claim, but because its present or future use by a given agent maximizes evolutionary profit. Enforcement is not guaranteed by insurance or ideological rights, but by dynamic bidding that requires reputational capital, ensuring that only productive actors can justify protection. Rights enforcement becomes an emergent service index to evolutionary value, not to ideological entitlement or contractual privilege. Thus, anarcho-capitalism is not a final system but a transitional instability, a fragile local maximum in the evolutionary fitness landscape. Over time, it is outcompeted by evolutionary capitalism, which aligns power with productivity, internalizes loss, and resists collapse through rapid feedback and reputational selection. Unlike anarcho-capitalism, which cannot guarantee consistent or legitimate protection due to the volatility of profit-seeking enforcement markets, evolutionary capitalism generates a stable and sustainable supply of property defense. This is because defense is allocated not arbitrarily or ideologically, but according to an ethic that ties protection to the evolutionary value of the property's use. Agents must reputationally justify that their continued control of property contributes positively to long-term adaptive productivity. In doing so, defense services evolve not as private favors or arbitrary contracts, but as emergent necessities of preserving high reputation capital. This stability is not imposed, it is selected, making evolutionary capitalism not only more efficient, but fundamentally more resilient than anarcho-capitalism or any static rights-based system.